Good evening, everyone. Welcome to my weekly Node-RED live stream. An hour or so of doing some interesting Node-RED development work. Let's just turn that down a bit bright. Yeah, so an hour or so of some Node-RED work. Got an interesting bit of an interesting issue to tackle, which is a bit of a sort of new feature in that it's something we just don't do, but it is arguably a bug because we should. Yeah, so what have we been up to? So 2.1 release went out last Thursday. We've had two maintenance releases since, 2.11, 2.12. 2.13 will go out tomorrow morning. Just been a few tricksy regressions in the typed input, the widget we use all over the place. But yes, hopefully managed to squash all those. Also created some manual test cases for it to help try and prevent that happening again. So that's good. What else is going on? We've got, we've got the issue we're going to look at tonight. One thing I will say is, if you're watching the live stream, so all these videos do end up on YouTube. I mean, chances are, if you're watching this in the future, watching the archive. So what I did last week, well aware I hadn't, that it was hard to browse the archive and knowing what we're covering. Last week, I went back through all 58 videos we've got, and I have updated all the titles of all the videos and all their descriptions to give a better, at least a hint as to what is in that video, and they've all got nicer title cards. There are a few too many because, you know, the auto-generated YouTube thumbnail was too often me with some awkward mid-word contorted face. So yeah, I've gone through and polished all those up, and I have a little script now I can run to generate the title card. So it was a couple of hours of manually updating all 58 videos, but it'll be quick and easy for me to do in the future, which is good. So yeah, and I made a few tweaks. I've hopefully tidied up the chat sidebar in the video that you can all see. I've made it, hopefully it's a little more accessible. Let me know if it looks better. But yeah, so hello to everyone who's there. What are we covering tonight? Well, there is a couple of different things we could look at, but the one I wanted to look at, because it's going to touch on, it's one that it's not a super quick fix. It's going to need a bit of work, but it spans both runtime and editor. And I've done so much stuff in the editor recently, I thought it would be interesting to do a bit that needs some work in the runtime as well. And it's to do with when you install a module using the palette manager, unlike when you start the editor loads all of your nodes in one request. There's a single admin endpoint that returns the HTML for all the nodes in one block, which is good because it means we can just efficiently transfer the lot rather than have to make lots of requests. But if you install a node dynamically, if you install the node dynamically, then the editor has to just go and get the HTML for that one node. And we've got the endpoints for that. What it fails to do, what's been overlooked, is a feature that not many nodes take advantage of, but we actually allow a node to say, to identify properties from your runtime settings file that belong to that node and should be exported to the editor. and they are in there when we do the initial load of the editor and we do the initial load of the settings. All those settings are there for the nodes you've got installed. But if you dynamically install a node, then you don't have any of the custom settings, runtime settings for that node get loaded into the editor, which is what this issue is talking about. So this is in the Home Assistant WebSocket package. They export a node setting called the HA API version, so you know what, actually, well, whatever it's for is irrelevant. But yeah, so they install their nodes, but this setting hasn't been loaded. So what we need to do is, when we install a module, an extra step on top of loading its HTML, loading its any message catalogs, loading any example flows, a bunch of other stuff we load for every module, we also need to be able to say, does this node expose any settings? Okay, that's the task in front of us. I'm going to kind of crack straight on with that. Now if I, hold on, too much going on. Right, let's, well, this is intriguing. Who's... okay. Sorry, there's a bunch of stuff I don't recognize, and I bet that's because doing some testing, I've installed some other nodes which probably drag in some other dependencies. So, when I hit refresh, you can see we load a lot of things. 205 requests, is that real? Yeah, we load a whole bunch of stuff. Somewhere in here, if I search for settings, you can see we make a request to /settings. And the response is it's the exported settings that the editor needs to care about. So if we just have a look at what that contains. It's JSON, so let's just prettify it. Right. Oh, what's the linter complaining about now? Go on, what's wrong? Oh, okay, I can't get rid of it. But you can see it's got the settings, like what version of Node-RED this is, what's the context store setup, what edit, if you've enabled Monaco, what your editor settings, your libraries, your external modules, your project settings. And then as we come down here, we can see nrlint. We can see, actually nrlint might be an awesome example. So the fact there's an nrlint section in the settings file, if I go and show you what does nrlint, which is a plugin, so there's nothing hard-coded in the core of Node-RED to say you should be exporting nrlint, because we don't export all settings by default. Nodes have to tell the runtime what settings should be exported, so we don't accidentally leak something from the settings file to the front end over the admin API. So I'm just trying to find the lint tool. Here's nrlint. If we have a look at its nodes, which I think is in nrlint core HTML. Whole bunch of code you don't need to worry about. Whole load of code here. Bear with me. Yeah. So here you can see it's registering. Oh, sorry, I'm looking in the HTML file. That's the wrong thing to look in. We should be looking in the .js file. Here we go, perfect. So here you can see for nrlint, when we register it in the runtime, one of the things we pass in says settings, and it's saying asterisk, basically every setting for nrlint is exportable, by which it means any setting that begins nrlint should be exported to the editor. And that's done over the endpoint settings. It's all got merged into the big global settings object. In fact, if I just open that up in a new tab and I just load settings, yeah, this would be a much quicker way to show you. So this is all the settings, and mixed in here are the node settings just merged in. So what we want to do, well, what we could do is once you've installed a module, we could just reload this whole settings file. And we could, well, I was about to say we could do that, but we won't. Actually, maybe that's all we need to do. That all we need to do is just reload this settings file, and in theory it should then have picked up the settings, the extra settings for the module. What I was considering, and what I assumed we would do, is actually add an endpoint so that you can do settings / and then a module name, and then it would return the settings for that particular, any settings exported for that particular module. You know, semantically there's a niceness about doing that. But you know what, maybe we could just get away with just reloading the settings file. Okay, we're going to do that. Yeah, we're just going to see what does it take just to reload the settings file. So yeah, I reserve the right to extend the settings API in the future just to return discrete parts of it, but there's also probably think that might be overkill for what we need to do tonight. So I'm going to leave, just clear up all the stuff I was working on. Leave nrlint core over there, which actually we shouldn't need to come back to, but let's now switch to look at how does the editor load the load its settings. So we want to go find the editor code. So here we are in the Node-RED repository. We're in packages, node modules, @Node-RED, editor client, source JS. So this is all the code for the editor. And in here we have settings.js. In fact, I'm going to move that there, close that there, give you all some space. Yeah, so red.settings, this is what does the work. If we scroll down and just look at what API it exposes, it's got an init function and it's got a load, and it's got a load user settings. So let's just remind ourselves what's what. Oh, that's right. So we've actually got two different. Yeah. So you've got /settings, which are the runtime settings. So those are the same for every user who accesses Node-RED. And then you've got /user, which are the settings customized for this particular user. So you can see all my custom keyboard shortcuts and editor, anyway, per user. So we already do have the idea of having sub queries under settings, but we're not going to go there right now. So that's why we've got two different, we've got load user settings, which loads, as you can see here, settings /user. And then up here you've got load, which is kind of the main entry point, which is what does the get of /settings. And it goes through and it calls set properties with whatever gets returned. So let's go and look at what set properties does. And what set property does is, given the data to load, it just having a quick read of it. Yeah, okay, so it actually has more logic in there than I thought. So it iterates over what we already have in settings in the editor, and if anything has... Sorry, what is this logic doing? So it loops over loaded settings. So for every property in loaded settings, if red.settings already has that property, then we delete it. And then, yeah, okay, I think, yeah, that must be doing that for a reason. It must be to do with some weird merging of objects. So then it comes down here and iterates over the new stuff, and it sets red.settings, whatever. So what we should find is red.settings.nrlint should exist, which it sure does. Okay, so that's set properties. Do we actually call that? So we only call that in the one place. So what I think we just want to do is, so this load function does the initial load, and you can also see here it does things like, if you ever looked in the JavaScript console in the browser when you start Node-RED, it does print out version numbers of everything, and that's where all this comes from. Or this is where it does that work. That all happens there. So what we're going to do is what we want to have is a var refresh settings. Yeah, we want to have a function that we can call that will load the settings. And what we're going to actually do, so I'm just success error. So in this request, if it's successful, it does this code up here. And if there's an error, it does this stuff down here, including dealing with not authenticated or not authorized, triggering login and that sort of stuff. And that's important. We don't muck around with refreshing the settings. What I'm trying to do is, rather than just copy and paste a bunch of this code, can we actually pull out the common piece of making the request, and then in the load case be able to do this extra stuff. You know, I'm not going to. Sounds silly. I'm just going to copy and paste for now. So you can see we're going to, as we did before, call set properties with the data. And having looked at that, I think that's going to update everything we need it to update. And then we just need to handle... I'm going to copy that whole cell. Yeah, there's definitely scope here for doing this better. Of interest. Here. Yeah. I'm just trying to trying to plumb through, because this done callback, if I'm going to reuse this function, essentially what I'm trying to get to is where instead of having all this duplicate code, we're going to call refresh setting. Yeah, we're going to call refresh settings, which will do the load up here in the set properties. And then its callback is going to look like this. So if not, then that's where we do this extra work. Otherwise, if there is an error, well, if there is an error, then we're not. Yeah, sorry, I'm talking in riddles as I do sometimes. I think we can get rid of all that. Not quite all that, all of that. And up here, because, right, we're going to call refresh settings and we're passing this function, which is the done callback that we want it to call. Basically this done callback. So it's going to do the load, set the properties, then call done without any arguments. So is undefined. So it will carry on doing the code it was doing before. And then it calls its own done. Works its way back up the stack. If there is an error, it does this code, which is exactly the code it would do previously if there was an error. And here you can see it then calls load. Oh, it's recursive. It does the login, and once the login's successful, it then retries the load. And then calls done when the load is successful. So it will never actually call the done with an error. Curious. Okay, we're going to run with this. There's a few scenarios we'll want to test, and yeah. But the main point is we've now got a function that will reload the settings and update the settings object, separated out from the extra work that's done that first time we load it, and then we log stuff and we carry on loading the editor. So we just need to expose that down here so we're able to call it. Excuse me. Okay, so let's check. Is Node-RED rebuilding itself in the background? No, it's not. And I'm in the wrong branch. Okay, let me just sort things out. Div branch, delete, item fix. Good. So let's check out a branch, and we're going to call this load. No, reload node settings. Cool, and then we run grunt dev to build the code, run it, watch for changes, rebuild as needed. Good, good. Right. So error. Data is not defined. Okay. So I've already mucked up somewhere. Where is data not defined? Right. So this done callback, this data value we actually use down here. So what we're going to do is actually pass in two arguments to this callback. And data. Then, so here we pass in null for the and we pass data Reload. Cool. So that's all loaded. Everything's loaded, and let's just check. red.settings.nrlint is set, so we are still successfully loading the settings. And if I run red.settings.refresh settings, and I provide a callback for and data, console.log console.log data. See, I get null for the error, and I get the settings, and I've loaded exactly the same settings as we'd already loaded, but it hasn't complained that we've refreshed the settings. Okay, so now what we want to think about is, so now we've got an API to reload the settings in the editor, to requery them. So now let's go find the code which gets run when a new module gets added. And this one, I just need to remind myself. Yeah. Right, so the way this works is when the palette manager calls the APIs to trigger and install, the actual notification that this install succeeded, well, sorry, no, the HTTP request to the API will return success or failure if the install worked or not. But asynchronously to that, over the WebSocket connection between the runtime and the editor, the runtime will publish a notification message. Is it? No, sorry, a notification message of type notification node added. And it does that for each node set, and a node set is one of the HTML files in a module. So this will get called multiple times for a given module if it has multiple nodes in. But that's because each node set, as we call it, has its own node catalog, it has its own HTML to load, so that all makes sense. What we don't really want to do is we don't want to refresh the settings for every node set. We just need to know, well, something's been added, so we better do a refresh of the settings before we load those nodes into the editor. So I think this is the right point to do red.settings. So I'm just scanning through. Yeah, red.settings. What do we call it? Refresh settings. And at this point, we're just going to call it. We don't care at this level what the data returned is. That's been dealt with already. So we don't actually care what error and data are. But once we've refreshed, we can then do the work to load, to iterate over the types that have been added and to do the loading. And there's one other place we need to do that, which is here where we so again, I'm just pausing just to scan through the node enabled case. Yeah. We don't care if it gets disabled, upgraded. Well, you've got to restart the runtime anyway, and you need to reload the editor after an upgrade for that all to work. So, okay, so we've now inserted calls to refresh the settings whenever a new node has been installed, which kind of feels nice. What, of course, we now need is an example node to test this out with. Now we could... I'm just wary of installing the Home Assistant. No, let's try it. So, given the bug issue is around contrib Home Assistant WebSocket, let's try that out. I haven't actually verified that their nodes properly registered settings, but on the, I'll take it for at face value that what they describe is right. So, red.settings HA API version is undefined, which is what you would expect because I haven't got those nodes installed. So let's go to Manage Palette, Install. Yeah, I mean the reason I shy away from this module is only it's big. So, but let's see what we get. Yeah, churn, added 80 packages. Nodes added to the palette. Okay, and without refreshing anything, red.settings.ha API version is still undefined. Okay. Well, something hasn't worked. So if I reload settings and come down and have a look, you can see HA API version is set. In fact, blimey, it adds a ton of settings. Right, so let's just look at network. So here you can see all the network requests for settings. In fact, let's go to the filter and let's... here you can see it's loaded the message catalogs. Yeah, I should probably have had this one open so I would be able to tell conclusively where we were. Here we're loading the message catalogs for, I don't know if you can see in the tooltip there, Node-RED contrib, Home Assistant WebSocket. I don't know why the edit worker is being loaded there. There it's refreshing the nodes. Why is it doing that? Keys, catalogs. No, I think I need to... Right. I need to redo this cleanly. Home Assistant WebSocket, remove. Oh, thanks, Steve. Yes, the edit worker got loaded because I opened up the log view, which is Monaco, and yeah, good. Right, let's see where we're at. If I refresh, see now this is potentially another bug. I've removed the module, but the settings are still in settings. I think I'm actually going to have to tell Node-RED to restart to properly flush. Yeah, this... I don't want to get caught into a can of worms of... Oops. Right, that one. 89. Just hitting a random file that will cause Node-RED to reload. Okay, so we've restarted clean. Reload settings, and okay, we haven't got any of the HA stuff. Good. In here, I'm just going to hit clear, so the log is empty. In fact, no, I better refresh just to make sure I'm clean. Hit clear. Manage palette. And again, I'm just going to keep hitting clear. Hit install. What was it? Home Assistant WebSocket. Oh, home. Yeah, okay. Hit install, hit install. So, okay, let's watch the request on here. So there's the put or the post to nodes to request the install. And then, so it has done a reload of the settings, which is good. And then it's loaded everything else. So if we have a look at what response that sent back, bit hard to make out, but oh look, HA entity version. So it is successfully calling settings, and it is that response does, or the preview. Oh, thank you, of course. Yeah, so you can see the response has included all the HA settings, but does red.settings.HA API version is what? Okay. This time it's worked. So now I'm wondering, did I reload the editor after I made those code changes? Because if I didn't reload the editor, then I wouldn't have had those code changes and it wouldn't have loaded settings. Or is there a timing issue? No, I think the last go round I hadn't refreshed the editor because the console was full of the stuff where I'd played around with the API calling refresh settings. But then I went back and made the code changes to call refresh settings. And when I came back into the browser, this stuff was still down there and I hit clear rather than reload. So yes, when I did that first test, I hadn't actually loaded the code changes. But the point being, this go round, it has worked perfectly. It has now successfully reloaded the settings. So anything that node has introduced has worked, which is nice. Now, another little test we're going to do is if I hit disable all, so it's disabled all those nodes, we're then going to reload Node-RED. So it's a restart. Okay. Then now if I reload settings, you can see the HA stuff doesn't appear because all those node sets are disabled. They have not been loaded, so we don't know about them. And then if I hit, so this is going to be the interesting one. So let's clear that. Let's go to network. Let's clear that just in case I need to look at what happens. When we click enable all, you can see it's called settings. It has called settings. It's called settings, but it's not loaded. Okay. In network, I would expect it to see it load all the HTML for the nodes as well and the message catalogs. That hasn't happened. So let's just check. What does red.settings.ha? Yeah. So that setting now exists. And if I refresh the settings here, they all appear, which is good. But have the nodes appeared? Yeah, the nodes have appeared. And have they got their HTML? Well, they must do. Okay, it's working. Cool, we fixed the bug. So we now refresh the settings whenever we successfully install modules. So if those modules export any settings, they will get loaded and the editor gets updated with them. I think that's job. Well, that's this issue fixed. There is this question about if we delete or disable a node module, its settings hang around like a bad smell. Yeah. I'm going to live with that for now. We've always, yeah. It's such an edge case. It's not going to stop anything working. It would be cleaner to tidy those things up, but yeah, given it's 8:45 and I don't want to fall down a rabbit hole at this point, This is not going to be 90 minutes, this stream. We're going to wrap up promptly. But yeah, I think we have successfully tested. We've successfully fixed the issue, tested it, and it is working. We've tested installing the module. We've tested enabling the module. We're reloading the settings. Things still work. I think all is good. I think we are happy. So let's commit it. So we've made two sets of changes. One in red.js, which handles the events when nodes are enabled or installed. And it, before it does the work to load the node, it refreshes settings. And then in settings, we've refactored it to do the refresh properly. So here's a test case we really should verify before. If I just go into my settings file, go to admin auth, and I enable admin auth. Because this is the loading of settings is actually that's the API call we make to discover the user needs to be logged in. So it's pretty critical that hasn't been impacted by the changes. So when I hit reload, yeah, bounces me as it should to the login dialog. That's exactly as it should. If I log in, and we hit a bug. We have hit a bug. Good. It has failed. Good job we tested this. So in fact, it's the same error as we got the first time I tested it. Let me explain. Where are we meant to be? We're meant to be in settings.js. So the error is saying this data in our callback to refresh settings is undefined. So the first time we hit that was in the golden path when we get success here. We set the properties and we call done and we pass the data back through. What happens the second time? Well, okay, I'm going to melt my head here a bit. If we get a 401, you need to be logged in error, we go tell the user system that it needs to go down the login path, and we provide a function to call once the user is successfully logged in. And what that does is it calls load and with its and reprovides the here's the problem. We've got too many dones. This done down here, let's call it load done. We call refresh settings with this, let's call it refresh done. So within this function, I'm going to break convention. Let's call this one refresh done. And we call it, and in the code, we were doing this. We were re-entering the load function, but we were passing it the refresh done. Which is wrong. So I'm just going to undo that name because I don't, yeah. And so instead of calling load, I think this should be, we should need to be re-entering refresh settings because that's what we need to retry. And once that succeeds, we'll go back to whoever called refresh settings originally, which is this guy down here, and everything will work, he says, with super confidence. Right, so let's see that in action. Let's reload. We are logged in because we did successfully log in. Why? Why is it showing me the tour? Oh, it's showing me the tour guide because I'm logged in, and this is the first time my admin user has run 2.1. Good. So in fact, it's working. I hit log out, and let's just refresh. So we get the 401 on the settings URL. Perfect. We log in with admin and password. Yes, I know. This is a problem when you use password as your password when you're developing and everything shouts at you. It's like, yes, but anyway. Yeah, well, this has worked. We're logged in. Everyone's happy. Jobs are good, and glad I tested that. Otherwise, we would have balked it completely. Right, so we are going to say refresh editor settings whenever a node is added or enabled. And this fixes issue number. Anyone shout it from the sidelines? 3217. This ensures any node provided settings are loaded and ready for use by the nodes. Okay, good. So we're going to push that up to the branch. Going to hit the link. So Type Twitch came across need to clear up old config issue with Google accounts related plugins. Is there an easy way for a user to clear old plugin configuration, or does it end up get issues and then user many edits, deletes config files, backup flows? I don't know. I guess it depends what the config is and where it's being stored. Is the honest answer. It might, in theory, ought to be just simple as enough of deleting the config nodes which contain that config. So unless it's something stored elsewhere, I'm not sure. Create pull request. Stick this into master because this is a bug fix. And yeah, that's done. Let me just have a look. Cool. I think we're happy with that. So that issue is ready to close once we merge that pull request. We've got a few other issues have come in recently. Yeah, so a couple streams ago, you'll recall we spent a bit of time tidying up reworking the debug sidebar, and we spotted there was a slightly. Oh, let me just wait for that to restart. There are some other options in the debug sidebar. Come on, are you loaded yet? If I just inject some messages. Oh, I'm on the. Come on, debug. There we are. We have this drop-down menu of tools as well, which has this filter this node option, which if you click it, doesn't seem to do anything. If I just stick in 2 of these, clear all those messages, and then just fire. So I've got 1 of each from each of these debug nodes. And if I say filter this node, nothing changes. And if I say clear filter, nothing changes. If I go to the selected nodes option and select those two nodes. Okay, so we still have both those nodes showing. Then if I say filter this node, it has filtered that node. And then if I say clear filter, what has it done? Yeah, so clear filter hasn't taken us back to where we were. But you can see the selected nodes, it's gone back to just this top one being ticked and not the bottom one. If I... okay, the clear didn't work, so if I go and tick them both now, so they both appear, and if I now hit filter this node, that's worked, and if I go and look at what the selected nodes filter selection is, it's the top one select. Yeah, it's broken. I think the logic, the trouble is, if you have all nodes filter and you say filter this node, I guess it's how do you layer the options, because it might be you want selected nodes and then say filter this node so you just see this one, but it might be you go in and you very manually, you go and select, yeah, these are the exact ones I want. I don't want these down here. That's the perfect setup I want. And then you'll go and, well, I temporarily just want to focus in on this one node. Which has indeed selected that one node. But there's no, and then hitting clear this filter, what should clear this filter do? Should that then go back to where it was before? Which it clearly isn't, because it's leaving that one ticked. If I tick them both and say, okay, so we've got the node BFF and this node is 309. If I say filter this node, it's removed that node rather than left it. Yeah, so it's, the option is broken. Yeah. Hey, New Street New. No, I've not gone through 2.1. I've been doing actual bug fixing and development work tonight. Yeah, I did do the release video, which does cover all the features of 2.1 on the release blog. But yeah, I've been bug fixing tonight. Anyway, and we have already pull requested tonight's work, which I'll get merged in, and we'll release that tomorrow in 213. And I was just having a quick look at this debug sidebar, filter this node doesn't, which, yeah, again, with considering the time, and I'm not running long tonight, I'm going to wrap up in the next few minutes. I'm not going to, the fact that this is blatantly broken needs a bit more attention than I want to give it rushing it right now. So we'll, whether I look at this before 213, I suspect I want to get 213 out first, because some of the typed input stuff that's leaked out has been a little nasty. And the sooner that's out, the better. Actually, there was one complaint about the spinner, our spinner widget, which has shrunk. So that's another one I need to go tidy up. I will just show you this one. This is a node I've created recently, which, because the number of times I want to test our widgets, and I end up just temporarily editing the inject node or some other node and throwing it in. Well, I've actually created now a local node that is my test bed for all of the UI features as I write them. So typed inputs, and that's, yeah, just quickly testing a bunch of stuff. This is the autocomplete test, which is nice. And then all of these are test cases for the typed input that I've written in the last 24 hours, testing a whole variety of, I mean, it may not be apparent in the UI, but if I expand out flow tests, so here you can see a lot of typed inputs for flow values that all look identical, although some down here, because I've got multiple context stores, so these ones down here have used the default store. Now they all look identical in their value, but their code for each one of these is doing a different combination of things to try and ensure that it doesn't matter what order things do stuff, things should still work. So things like typed inputs that start with an empty value, you then set the value, you then set the type. Ones which have anyway, you can see there's just lots of different combinations, and also doing the stuff with flow context where you've got context stores encoded in the value which you users never see. That broke in 2.1. So are there tests for UI in the test suite? There aren't. There are and there aren't, which is not a good answer. There is a grunt task which is capable of running UI tests of the editor. So that's a bunch of work Hitachi did to get that infrastructure working. But it's got some, it's got a trivial number of actual tests. It's one of those that you spend more time writing the test framework and getting that working than actually running the tests. And unfortunately the tests are quite brittle because like with the tour guide, it relies on no intimate knowledge of the structure of the page to know how you can click, where you click a button, and all that sort of stuff. And then it's quite hard with like the typed inputs. Some of the bugs we've had have been, not all, but some have been cosmetic rather than functional, if you see what I mean. So it's very hard to write a test case that says, run this code, then does this widget look correct? Short of, I mean, there are techniques of doing that, but they're very expensive. They're very processor intensive, and they are expensive to maintain as things change. So, so there's always a trade-off. Trying to do more manual testing of areas that get modified. And, I will admit a lot of the bugs in the typed input were through not thorough enough testing of all the different edge cases that have grown over the years as the typed input has grown to just the huge amount of things it can do. And that's why I've created this node, so I can... and I've purposely written these so that, again, these three inputs all look identical, but under the covers they are doing drastically different things, all legitimate things, but the sequences of function calls they call are all very different, and all designed to exercise code paths that have had bugs in them. And basically this is saying, this is working as long as they are all string type with the value foo. Because in the code, here we go, default type. So here we've got one where we set, this is the sort of the vanilla case. We set the value of the input before we turn it into a typed input to foo. We then enhance it to become a typed input with the default type of string. Then here's a case where we don't set the value and we don't set a default type, which means it will default to bool. We then set the value to foo and then set the type to string. So we set the value to a string type even though the type of the input at that point in time is expecting Boolean, but we then switch it to string, which is a pattern that was very common because it's what our switch and change nodes used to do. And in fact, that's one of the bugs fixed in 2.1.2 this morning. And here we've got one that, again, does another interesting sequence. And one of the things I've added in typed input is this new flag, debug true, which is why in my console you can see all of this debug output. So now, because it was getting a bit of a pain, particularly UIs that use a lot of typed inputs, to add in debug and getting spammed with that debug for lots of typed inputs, we can now be much more selective and say, okay, this is the one giving us trouble, and I can turn on debug on an individual. Anyway, waffling a bit, and I want to grow this out, make sure we capture more scenarios. Because it's frustrating when, even having had the beta out for 2 weeks, equally I know one of the issues with the typed input crept in after the last beta. So even if these people reporting the issues had tried the beta, they wouldn't necessarily have spotted these bugs, which is always a bit frustrating. But anyway, there we are. We're 9 o'clock. Oh, Pokeballs asks, would using TypeScript help with types in Node-RED? No. 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 It might, but no. Not really interested in TypeScript. That is based on having spent time using it, playing, developing with it. The Flow debugger is written in TypeScript, for example. Nothing against it. It's great. It does what it does, but it'd be really hard to justify any great rewrite of anything in TypeScript in Node-RED, just for the sake of moving to TypeScript. But that's my take on it. Anyway, here we go. And all of this code, this is UI front-end code anyway, and not keen on having too much too many steps between the code you write and the code that actually runs in the browser. Again, personal choice, but that's kind of where I'm at these days. All right. So yes, we'll do 2.1.3 in the morning. Which will get that issue slipped in. Sorry, Steve, you asked, do you see MQT tests question? Are you considering any MQT tests? I would offer to update V5 Dynamically there. So let me have a look. I can't remember where the MQT tests ended up. I think, we don't have them, partly because the MQT nodes are fairly simple, but they are difficult to test well, meaningfully, because they rely on an external broker. We used to have a dependency on one of the JavaScript brokers, but which someone added, and I think I got rid of because it was just causing too much churn and pain in our dependency tree, because it, again, just so many security vulnerabilities kept getting flagged on it, and it really wasn't adding much to us. So it doesn't look like we've got node tests. Sorry, where am I looking? Test, nodes, core, common, no, not common, network. We don't have MQT tests, so we should have them, but again, it's working out how to write those tests in a way that keeps things working. We don't end up spending more time debugging tests and time. Any test that does stuff on the network that you can't stub any network access you're going to hit false positive failures, you're going to hit timing issues, you're going to hit, as in timing issues in the tests that make the tests far less reliable than they should be. And so at least with the HTTP stuff, we can mock it all locally, and there's good test tools for that. And yeah, and it's, I think Steve also, it's the V5 stuff. I can't remember, I've not looked, to be honest. I don't keep up with the JavaScript brokers because I have no need for them, but whether there's actually V5 support in the broker side, if you're not using Mosquito or something else, I don't know. So, yeah, it's a really good question. I think it is. I think there is. I've said before, for the testing, you know, we've got good unit tests of the runtime and of the nodes as individuals. We need more integration tests, as in tests that run Node-RED as is without stubbing out lots of internal components, so we can test a small piece of it at a time. That, I mean, that's good, that's important. But yeah, relying on a public broker, again, I'm no real fan of having a dependency in our tests that we can't control, and relying on whatever public broker being up and available at that point in time. You know, whether a free account on HiveMQ would be good enough. I mean, they're really good questions, Steve, and you know, trying to find the right solution is always a challenge, and it's why we end up without a good solution right now on that. But yeah, so we'll get I'll get 213 out in the morning. There's, you know, like I said, the debug sidebar filter. We'll need to get that fixed, and maybe that's something we'll tackle next Monday. Yeah, maybe I'll save that for next Monday, because yeah, well, we had Mosca for a while. I think, was it Mosca we had in there? But again, I think Mosca's not been updated for 3 years. It was the AD's broker. Is that what superseded Mosca? Yeah, so AD's, if that's how it's pronounced, is the new server. But the problem was, here we go, Mosca versus AD's. Well, the fact it says it's versus, that suggests this isn't. Yeah. Yeah, so we used to have ADs, but it was hugely out of date. I'm curious, here it says MQTV5 not supported yet in the list of features. So, yeah, I don't know how you square that statement. Yeah, no, I think Matteo, who did all the original work on Mosca, wouldn't so Mosca hasn't been updated in a long time, and yeah, Matteo has long since moved on, so yeah, we wouldn't consider Mosca as being a viable option. ADs, yeah, but again, it's non-trivial to write good client-side tests, but yeah, so that's the other option, is having some tests that break out of just the Node ecosystem, but that adds quite a lot of complexity. But when I talk about having integration tests that do more end-to-end flow tests, it may just get to the point where it's far easier just to do that, to have integration tests which you give it some flow JSON, and we have the flow testing framework coming down the path at some unknown rate. That may well be a route to, once we have that in place, that would be a good option for creating tests, good functional tests for all of the nodes that can actually test them in real flows, rather than the node test helper that is more designed for testing individual nodes in isolation rather than entire flows. Anyway, I waffle on. So yeah, successful stream. We've got a pull request. We've got an issue fixed. That is kind of what I wanted to cover tonight. 213 in the morning. Then I'm going to be doing some other stuff for a few days. So cool. Is there anything else I want to do tonight? No, I think that's all I'm going to do tonight. I'm going to wrap up. I've been saying for 10 minutes I'm going to wrap up early. I'm now wrapping up. So thanks everyone for joining. Do like, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. I'll be back next Monday, 8 PM UK time. Yeah, say hi, have a good week, all the usual stuff. And he says, trying to be smooth as he fumbles for the button. Where's the button? There's the button. I can say good night all. See ya.